So it was around the same time as medieval Europe. Medieval Asia and Africa were starting to form as well. So in China, there was a couple different civilizations that kind of formed dynasties. The first one was the Sui dynasty under Wendi. He restored order and created a unified law code that created the unification of China and allowed for China to kind of move forward. After Wendi died, the Tang dynasty was implemented, and the Tang dynasties were super important because they started to implement civil service exams. And these civil service exams are these basic tests that prove somebody to work for the government, and they are still used widely today. The Tang also were able to expand the empire by creating trade along the Silk Roads, which you see the map of on the right. After the Tang dynasty, they were not reunified for a couple hundred years until the Song dynasty. And the Song actually were able to create this centralized form of government and also reform the civil service exam and made it based on Confucianism and those ideas. There was also a couple different Chinese achievements. The woodblock printing is going to be the biggest one because this is going to lead into the printing press. It allowed for the faster copying of text and allowed them to carve text into woods and then make copies of it later. They also started using paper money, which was easier to trade with, and gunpowder, which we know and the Chinese have implemented with fireworks specifically. So to the west of the Chinese were the Mongols, and the Mongols were a major enemy of the Chinese. Genghis Khan was the ruler of the Mongols, and under his leadership it became united. The army used really brutal tactics. They would burn entire villages, think like Mulan, for example. After Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan took over, and he was able to control all of China and Korea, East Europe, which was a huge empire. He also started the Yuan dynasty in China, in which he declared himself emperor. He heavily taxed the Chinese and was pretty brutal to them as well. He also encouraged a lot of trade, and during his rule, Marco Polo actually came to China. So in the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire was established by the Turks. We previously talked about them with the Islamic Empire. The location of the Ottoman Empire is pretty strategic. It's between the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Muslim Empire in the east. They also tried to expand their empire by attacking the Byzantines, which they overall were able to do. They conquered their subjects with tolerance. They did make non-Muslims pay heavy taxes, though. In India, the Mughal Empire had started to form. It was known for its wealth. Babur had founded it, and he allowed his grandson Akbar to take the throne after him. He started to unify the Indian Empire by tolerance. He abolished taxes on people of different faiths and also tried to encourage discussion. So there was a lot of academic achievements happening in the Mughal Empire. After Akbar died, Jahangir, his son, became ruler, and it was actually Jahangir's son who created the Taj Mahal, Shah Jahan, who created it as a tomb for his wife. Japan also was developing during this time, and they're actually going to mirror feudalistic Europe. They started practicing a religion called Shinto, or a way of the kami, in which they built shrines and prayed to the kami. The central government started to lose power based on local clans, and so large landowners started to hire samurai for protection. And this started to lead into the Japanese feudal society, which was very similar to Europe, in which landowners paid samurai for their protection with food. Japan eventually was united by the Tokugawa family, who became the shogun. This was different than the emperor because the emperor was a figurehead, kind of like the Queen of England now, and they didn't have any political power. The shogun was the real political leader. During the Tokugawa rule, agriculture rose, population grew. It was a golden age. Under Tokugawa, they also implemented the feudal society, and the hierarchy became very rigid. At the very top was the emperor, then the shogun. Daimyos were known as the landowners, and then the samurai. Underneath this ruling class, well, there was a bunch of different peasants, artisans, and merchants that worked the land. Meanwhile, African civilizations were also starting to develop. They were hunter-gatherers for the most part previously. They were animistic. They thought that natural objects had spirits, and they did not develop a system of writing, but they had a lot of oral histories that are still in place today. Aksum was one of the first kingdoms developed in East Africa and controlled trade along the Red Sea, and they traded via the Saharan Desert. Ghana did not have access to the sea, so but it still became a major trading empire. They used camels for trade, and they also controlled all of the gold and salt. After Ghana declined, Mali rose to power, and Mali is known best for its leader, Mansa Musa. He was a devout Muslim, and he actually took a Hajj to the Middle East, to Mecca, in which he actually disrupted trade in Egypt based on how much money he had and spent. He was the richest man in the entire world. Probably even today, he would still be the richest man in the entire world. He was known for taxing the gold that came through his kingdom. So the rulers that followed Mansa Musa were not as strong, and eventually they became overshadowed by a neighboring civilization, the Songhai, who were also traders along the Trans-Saharan and eventually became Muslims.